Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Russell Reynolds' webinar on D&I in a crisis. My name is Anupama Puranik, and I lead the healthcare practice at the firm in Singapore. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dee Fitzgerald, in Australia, who is a key team member of our leadership and assessment practice, and also co-leads our inclusion and diversity practice for the region. As we reflected on the recent incidents that triggered racial discrimination issues in the US, and which very quickly became a global movement, our team thought of taking a good look at how we are faring in Asia on the I&D agenda. Diversity is not new to us, and if you happen to live in countries like Singapore or Hong Kong, for example, you can't help but admire the multicultural, multiracial, and multi-ethnic communities that we are all probably a part of. While gender diversity still seems to be what we are most conversant with, Asia is starting to recognize the many other aspects of diversity, and more importantly, appreciate the value of inclusivity that takes this concept beyond ticking a box on a form. To have an open and frank discussion around this, we have invited 3 leading experts and practitioners from around the region to share their perspectives with us. I won't get into too many details on their bios because you've probably seen them, but let me just do a quick round of introductions. Our first guest today is Sophie Guerin. She leads the D&I practice across Asia PAC at J&J and has been an active advocate of inclusion and diversity in the region for over a decade. Welcome, Sophie. J&J has been a pioneer in instituting a strong culture of inclusivity and is proud to be able to share today the advantages of creating a diverse and inclusive workforce, even from a business perspective. Sophie is from the US. She has spent over 17 years in this region and is the proud and sleep-deprived mother of a 1-year-old. So welcome, Sophie, to the forum. Our next guest today is Christina Hermansen, who is the Managing Director for Australia at FMC Corporation. Christina was also raised in the US, but has been a global citizen for a very long time now, and has been in Australia since 2018. As you might all know, FMC is an agri-chemicals company and a space where women leaders are very rare. A fun fact on Christina is that she has taken up boxing classes as travel has reduced during COVID, and juggles that with leading a country P&L and a young daughter who made an appearance at our last conversation on Zoom. So welcome, Kristina, to the conversation. Our third guest today is Priyadarshini Gupta, who leads D&I in India for Tata Sons, one of India's most trusted and forward-looking business houses. Priya started working in this space about a decade ago when the concept of D&I had just reached the shores of India. She is also a home chef, a master chef contestant, and thus leads a dual career. Welcome, Priya, to the forum. So we'll start off this afternoon with a few questions, and feel free to send us yours along the way. We'll be very happy, and the panelists will be very happy to answer them. And I will now hand over to Dee to start this conversation. Over to you, Dee.
Thank you, Anna, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today. The fact that over 200 people have registered to participate in this conversation underscores the importance of diversity and inclusion to all of us and its centrality in securing our organizational health and performance. And I'm as excited as you all are to hear from our guest speakers today. So we'll move forward to the first topic in just a moment. And as Anu just said, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please do, if you have any questions during the conversation, we'll monitor those as we progress, and we'll make sure that there's some time to answer as many as possible at the end of our conversation. The first topic we wanted to discuss today was leading inclusively. And it's something we know that has been getting harder, and feelings of alienation have been increasing of late. So really keen to hear your experiences Let's start with you, Priya. I know you've said that COVID has accelerated inclusion 2 to 3 years for you. Tell us a little bit more.
So at the Tatas, I think one thing that happened almost overnight was working remotely, right? We were talking about it for about years now, maybe a year, 2 years, but the pandemic unfortunately pushed us to work from home, remotely from wherever we were. And this actually almost pushed the leaders to become more inclusive in the way they dealt with the teams. I think that was the start point, you know. Started the biggest roadblock, I would say, for remote working in India, and that's not true only for Tatas, but across India, is the unconscious bias that you have as a leader or a manager, thinking that because I don't see the person in front of me, the person is not working. Now, that was something that myth busted with us working from home during the pandemic. Secondly, empathy became almost hygiene. You had to work with empathy. You had to have empathy for the team members because you are hearing every day that somebody's mother's got COVID, somebody's brother has COVID, somebody. So there is so much that is happening. So you have to develop empathy not only as a leader but as also as peers and within the organization. So I think that was the second change that happened literally overnight. We didn't do any training, we didn't have a choice, we didn't have time to do any training. It just was thrust in front of us. It was actually living with ambiguity and change, and bingo, there were 9 out of 10 managers and leaders who did it extremely well. There are some who are still struggling, and I wouldn't say that things are perfect. But yes, these two things happened almost overnight. The third thing that kind of came in was, how do you keep up engagement or be connected even though you are not seeing each other, and even with the fact that everyone's going through a certain sense of uncertainty, fear, all kind of things that are keeping coming into your mind. So the fact that almost across the Tata Group in India, and I'm talking about more than 78 companies in 10 industry segments, we kind of got into things like morning meetings and evening meetings, where morning meetings every day you kind of uh, talk about what you're doing in the day, and the evening meeting you kind of catch up with a cup of tea and have fun and laugh with each other, something that never happened so regularly when we were at work. So I think that was something in an action point that leaders started doing, even though it was difficult for them. The second thing, I mean, actually have talent shows, and Tata's Got Talent online. Amazing. I mean, that was something that we would have never thought of, right? We started writing stories. So we have this fiction thing going around, which, you kind of push the bait into somebody and that person picks up, and the stories are about our offices. So it's fun. So I think in terms of behavior, those were in terms of behavior, of the empathy and the inclusion kind of came into us. And in terms of small actions, and these are very small actions that I spoke of, were slowly getting integrated into how do we handle or how do we cope with it. We're still coping with it. I don't know. And I really don't know whether this is the right way. We don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. But I think these are some things that have worked. Um, I do feel, and I do hear leaders feeling and struggling with the fact that how do they manage diverse or not diverse teams in these situations where everyone's sitting remotely, and how do you drive inclusion? So the last thing I would also want to say is, this has actually brought about a focus on inclusion. Maybe not in the word inclusion, but through being more compassionate, being more authentic, being more inclusive, and all of that is nothing but being inclusive. I mean, if I'm sitting at home and I have one daughter and 3 cats, you don't have a choice but accept me with them, right? How much ever we said that when I sat at Bombay House, the iconic office of the Tatas in Mumbai, my line manager still had a choice of saying, don't pick up that phone if it's ringing, or I had a choice. But here, sitting here, I don't. I think these, and I think these are truths across, I mean, go beyond India, you know, and it's
Yes.
not something, but I think we're all learning and we're all struggling. Yeah.
Thank you, Priya, and I hope you've been doing some cooking demonstrations for colleagues as well.
I actually
as
have
part
a
of your
channel.
sharing
Yes.
talents.
Yes, so we have a
Good.
channel on the Tatas where I do my cooking and share recipes.
Good. Delighted to hear that. And continuing with the focus on inclusion, Sophie, if I could move to you, and certainly the J&J Credo is well known to many people. Tell us a little bit about how the Credo reflects some of the attributes that Priya has just been talking about.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me join this fantastic panel. It's such a timely conversation. Yeah, I think J&J is really unique in the fact that we do have a credo which has continuously guided the values by which we make decisions close to 100 years now. I mean, as an organization, we've been in operation for over 130. This has been a consistent document that provides a framework for how do we confront challenges, change, opportunities in values that have remained relatively consistent over close to 100 years. The Credo has only been updated 5 times, and this most recent one was just a few years ago, and where diversity and inclusion was introduced into the Credo. And so in it, we talk about the importance of creating an inclusive environment that respects individual diversity, dignity, and is an important opportunity for us to celebrate the diversity within our organization. And that's really ultimately linked back to our community, our customers, our patients, doctors, nurses, and it's really seen as the holistic way in which we better serve the communities in which we operate. And I think I'll just build on the previous sentiment, which was, I think this is, I've really seen this just being reinforced in the current environment where there is such an appetite for inclusion, and their leaders are so hungry to lean into stronger management leadership capabilities in a way to provide better support for the teams that they manage. I think people are under remarkable stress in the current environment, and and leaders recognize that they need to do more when it comes to supporting their team members. There's not only the immense pressures from a workplace perspective, particularly in the current economic situation, but also, you know, that blurring between personal and professional it's really gray these days, and so leaders in many ways have to are forced to recognize the complete individual for who they are, not just a slice of that image that they present in the workplace. And so for a lot of leaders, this is an area where they want to lean into, and I've been driving a lot of conversations within our frontline teams where they are confronting issues around how do I engage, how do I support the engagement of my team members, how do I make sure that we're continuing to deliver results, how do I help them cope with stress and mental health issues, and all of those things which we do have resources in within an organization, and I think they've always been ones that have been very well received, but I think we're seeing a much stronger take up right now across our organization, and there's a much stronger appetite because people see it as really relevant to their immediate business needs and challenges.
Thank you, Sophie. And Kristina, as a leader at FMC, tell us how you've been doing more to drive inclusion at this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can really relate to what both Priya and Sophie said, you know, in terms of empathy and that need for inclusion. You know, within agriculture and our business, 40% of our workforce are rural and remote anyway. So when we went kind of back to working at home, it created a more level playing field outside of our manufacturing team, who really have been our heroes in keeping the plant running during these times. But, you know, we took an opportunity to really live our motto, which is FMC, see yourself in FMC, be yourself in FMC. And with a lot of time off the road and a lot more time at home, you know, being yourself, being the mother, the father, whoever you are, and bringing your whole self to work. We had numerous events. So we did have some cooking events where everybody gets engaged. We've launched a Connect to a Buddy program where across all of Asia Pacific, you can sign up, really simple, meet someone you never would have the chance to meet otherwise with an FMC, and just have a chat. I think we really recognize that people just need to talk. You need to be able to process what's going on. There's a real heaviness, whether it's reading the news or what's happening within your broader life. And you know, we're really pushing to have the empathy to pause and think about that. We've also celebrated Pride Month with aggressive celebration. And again, you know, you get the chance to connect even more globally because people aren't on the road as much. They've got more time to engage. And for that very reason, we've also sponsored a mentor program with one of our biggest customers. And I've been able to engage some of our top female leaders within the organization to connect with young female Australian leadership potential. And again, that probably wouldn't have happened without this situation. So I feel like we're growing a lot in embedding inclusive leadership and the appreciation for what it means to the individual and our success.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And on that note, and I'll sort of take this question around the three panelists as well. But one of the things that when we think about the inclusion and diversity agenda, from a business perspective, a question often asked is, what is really my return on this kind of investment? Yes, it looks very nice on paper perhaps, and you know, we live in a nice, inclusive, diverse world, but how does this really translate to the bottom line and the top line for me as an organization? So maybe, Sophie, I'll ask you this question first. How are you guys, how is J&J looking at how has this contributed to the top line and the bottom line? And what advice would you give companies who are looking to measure impact of their R&D agendas?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it's often ones that comes up. It's really important that right from the get-go, folks really see diversity and inclusion as a driver of business success. I think that's the right way to approach it, and it's the right way to start. So how would you in any other unit measure business success? And with that same rigor and focus, look at what metrics are available to you that you already have access to, and what are the systems that you need to have in place in order to better measure, collect that data, and then analyze it, right? So there's also that analysis and technical capability. So we know that companies that are diverse and inclusive are more productive, they have lower risk, they have greater shareholder value, they have access to a wider range of emerging talent, especially in Asia Pacific. We know that women represent more than 50% of university graduates in many, many countries. So as you think about the representation in your own organization, and if you say you're a meritocracy, but you're underrepresented in women, you know, is that really the case? So it's important to look at your processes. We know that employees in India and China who work in inclusive environments report a higher ability to innovate, especially when you think about the economic opportunities in this part of the world, and I would say the economic resilience, especially in the current climate. These are really important contributing factors that you want to invest in and lean into. We think about how to build an inclusive environment. We know that flexible work leads to higher productivity, higher engagement, higher retention. So all of these things from an OpEx standpoint are really, really important in the current environment, right? So looking at all of these metrics and indicators which feed into that, we also know that more diverse and inclusive environments have higher engagement, reduces attrition. So this is very, very important. And if you have enough of the mechanisms in place, you can actually show correlation between customer satisfaction scores and highly engaged sales teams. So there's lots of options and available for organizations to tweak their measurement in a way that goes beyond simply representation. I think representation is an indicator of the outcomes of your investments as an organization, but it shouldn't be where you stop the measurement. And as I mentioned kind of earlier, there's some basic things that you need to have in place. If you don't have pulse surveys, if you don't have employee sentiment surveys in place, you're ultimately kind of cutting yourself off at your ankles. Those are tools that are really, really important to help you validate initiatives. It allows you to place to innovate and to test tactics to fuel your D&I strategy, and then you need to have those platforms in place. Then you need to have the workplace analysis capability that can actually look at that data and help to tell a story. Because if you have a bunch of data, sometimes it's hard to tell what's meaningful and what's not. And then what you're starting to see is more and more organizations that are embracing data scientists. So this is something that we have in J&J that look at this and say, okay, well, how does this fit into our broader work around the future of work, around driving innovation, around building digital capabilities and skills, and where's the correlation between investment in D&I and some of these broader strategic objectives that we have. And so that helps to not only give weight to your diversity and inclusion strategy, but it helps to really reinforce it as part of the business imperative within your organization to drive long-term success. And I think that's the other thing to keep in mind, that when we look at measurement and ROI, you're not looking at it from a weekly standpoint. You've got to look a little bit medium to long term in terms of seeing the value, especially if you're doing kind of large scale projects or initiatives. So just make sure that you have that data, you have that capability, and then you have the individuals who can help you to do the analysis and tell a broader story.
Thank you. And Kristina, you lead a PNL. So how do you see some of this working out as you as a leader sitting there and kind of driving some of these agendas for your team?
Yeah, for me, it is very much about top line and bottom line, every day, every quarter. But I'll take a step back from that, because to me, and I think the philosophy within FMC, it's actually pretty basic in that if you can come to work every day and feel good about yourself and be yourself, and not like I was probably 25 years ago as a young female engineer, dressing like a man and trying to get my hair back like a man and not be seen as a woman. If you can really be yourself, you're gonna do well. And the qualities associated with great inclusive leaders are resilience, being able to manage calmly through the storm and what we've been experiencing in the world, ups and downs of agriculture on top of that. Those are the leaders that in your gut are going to guide you through, and the numbers will come. We're probably not that sophisticated in data tracking in FMC quite yet. We are focused on tracking not quotas but targets towards gender equity and thinking through that. And as we do that, just keeping a focus on those numbers, I think shows, do you have the inclusive environment that's allowing you to keep progressing? And do you have the leadership buy-in to keep working towards those numbers? If you don't quite get there, you're gonna, understand why, but really drawing the learnings from that. So I guess our approach is less analytical than maybe it should be and will be one day. But as a R&D and innovation and agriculture company, we need the diversity to drive that top line, feeling good at work, being productive to drive the bottom line.
Interesting. No, and to that point, Priya, you're obviously sitting at the top of one of the biggest conglomerates in India. And you mentioned that D&I came to the shores of India literally about a decade ago from a concept perspective, brought in primarily by our multinational companies into the country. How have you seen this sort of being measured, evolved, calculated from your perspective over the years?
I'll talk about the Tatas first, since I sit at Tata's today. And then maybe, and that'll probably have reflections of the larger, what's happening in India also. So, so there is diversity and then there is inclusion, right? And there is this whole fluffy thing around D&I, right? I do believe if you can't measure something, it will not improve. So hence measurements, governance, and ROI is, I think, supremely critical for it to become sustainable. There is a school of thought in the D&I space that believe that something like inclusion cannot have a ROI, and it is more of a cultural thing and more something from the heart. But I do believe that you have to have an ROI, and it has to, as Sophie said, it has to have a business impact. It has to be linked to business. I shouldn't be doing D&I because I want to be fair to the underrepresented groups in my company. I should be doing D&I because it impacts my bottom line and my top line. That's the only way to do it. So that is there. In India, are we anywhere close to that? Maybe not. It's a journey, right? It's been a journey. We are still on the journey. We're still moving the needle from being at affirmative action and concept of concept of fairness. I will not say equality. Concept of fairness to the next level. But I think the journey is important. If you jump those and go directly to a space where, I know where it's directly connected to my bottom line and top line, maybe it wouldn't be so meaningful. So I do see that it's important for us to go through that journey. It'll take time. I think this is it's a change agenda that doesn't show results overnight. So it'll take its own time. We have to be patient and resilient to be able to wait for that change to happen. Coming to the Tatas, I think what we do here is at the group level, we kind of look at inclusion as our founding stone. We leave representation to our group companies to drive. So we do not mandate any numbers in terms of representation. It's up to a Titan, it's up to a Tata Steel, it's up to a Tata Motors to decide what is the right number of, whether it's gender, whether it's PWD, whether it's LGBTQ+, whatever they want to do, whatever's relevant to their business. But at the group level, what we drive relentlessly is inclusion and how we can drive a more and become a more inclusive workspace. How do we measure? I think governance and sustainability is high on our plates to be able to move the needle at the Tata Group from where they are to be seeing it as something that drives business rather than being at a fairness, affirmative action kind of space. One of the things that we do to be able to drive that is we have a pillar called data powers progress, in which we look at data across over 70 companies and 10 industry segments, deep dive into analytics, like Sophie said, to come up with trends. And we picked up these trends. We, of course, shared a snapshot to our chairman, who kind of uses and leverages it in his work. We also do a playback to the MDs and the CHROs of all the group companies saying, hey, this is what it looks like, and this is what's happening in your company. That's one. Second, we are fortunate enough to have our hands into the engagement scores and engagement work that we do across the group. So what we are driving, and we are not there, I'm not saying that we are there, but we're trying and we are attempting. So actually, there is a connect, which I believe strongly and our team believes strongly, but to show and have the leaders across the companies accept that if you work on inclusion, your engagement scores go up, the sense of belonging goes up, and that's when your productivity or efficiency goes up, right? So it's not, I mean, you might say I'm whatever, GPTW scores and Q12 scores, it's nothing but inclusion. Nothing. So it's just another word. These are all English words, So making that connect and seeing that shift, the shift has happened in we converted, but it's about making that change in the CHROs and the MDs, those 100 odd CHROs and MDs that we have, and then cascading it down. So these are some small things that we do. In fact, funnily enough, this afternoon, we have something called Inclusion Masterclass that we run for people across the Tata Group. And these are nuggets of information that we do to build capability and to help people see different perspectives around this. And this afternoon, I have a session with 33 people across 7 group companies where I will be talking about ROI of, and the important, not only ROI, but I think before that, just understanding governance. Who reviews you? No, I get reviewed. When I ask somebody, DNA accelerator, no, there is an agenda and we get reviewed. I said, who reviews you? Does the MD review you? How much of time? Is it reviewed in the business review, or do you have a 15-minute slot with a HR manager who reviews your work? And I'm not demeaning that person, but to be able to get the traction, you need to ensure that the right reviews happen and the appropriate times. So these are small things that we are working towards to be able to, at a very subtly kind of, get the ROI and the governance piece for the MDs and the CHROs to one day come up and say, oh, I didn't realize that, and sell them the pink elephant without them realizing it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So it needs sponsorship from the business in order for it to, interesting. Thank you.
I think
Dee, we can't hear you.
Mute. You're on mute.
I shouldn't be.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. And of course, wanted to pick up on the topic of unconscious bias and inequity. And one of the things we've seen during the pandemic is that women have been disproportionately impacted by what's happening in a number of different ways. And I see that coming through on our Q&A as well. With that in mind, I'd like to start with you, Kristina, as a woman in ag. How are you supporting and developing women, not just during this difficult period, but actually in developing their careers in agriculture?
Yeah. Well, I guess during this time and every time, and as you know well, Dee, unconscious bias is, as I look back in my career and some of those moments that were so challenging and that I learned the most from, unconscious bias was typically involved. So for us, really educating, building processes in the business to ensure that we get unconscious bias and in an inclusive culture, creating that environment where we can pause and catch each other, when that happens. So I think that's a foundation for helping young women, move forward. But once again, I guess for me in particular, less travel. I've really enjoyed connecting back with a couple of young women that I've worked with in the past from other industries and helping them build a career pathway into agriculture, because it is a pretty exciting place to be in this day and age. So, with that, it's really looking at connecting them in ways that they might not necessarily be thinking about, building the confidence to go out and get those connections and dream big about what can be out there. And then I think reflecting back on moments of unconscious bias or, other barriers that might not be understood. I think it's our duties as a leader and during these challenging times to really help share what we've learned in the difficult times to bring them forward. I think, again, for young women in agriculture, our business, we're about 100 people in Australia, but our sphere of influence is huge in that we have great relationships with all of our customers, you know, with thousands of people on the ground in communities. And that's where, you know, we're thinking way beyond our borders to how do we work with them and then in the communities and role model not only the right behavior, but role model young women out as sales reps that speak strongly agronomically and, you know, again, learn to have the confidence to sit in the room with 10 men around the table and be fine with that. That's something that takes some time. It takes coaching and role models, I think.
And fabulous to have a role model like yourself at FMC, Christina. And Sophie, if I could turn to you, and I know from an Australian perspective, J&J are an employer of choice from a gender equality point of view. Tell us a little bit about what you at J&J are doing to develop and retain the diverse talent that you've been successful in attracting into J&J.
Yeah, so you know, I think like most companies, there's not a lot of hiring that's happening at the moment. I think this is something that people will universally note in the market. And so I'm actually, you know, when I think about how I'm driving diversity and inclusion, and we're looking at gender representation specifically within our organization, I'm seeing this as an opportunity to really invest in our talent, right? Because we're not doing a big hiring push like most companies. This is a huge opportunity for us to look at our organization as is and say, what's working, what's doing well, and how do we lean into that? And what are things that perhaps we're not really getting a lot of ROI on, or it's perhaps doesn't have a strong correlation to better diversity or inclusion outcomes, right? And we can start to pull away from that, because this is an opportunity where all of us are looking at how do we redeploy our resources in a way in order to drive better business outcomes. So one of the things that we're doing, like a lot of companies, we have employee resource groups or ERGs or BRGs or affinity networks. That each company has them a little bit differently. And as I think about the strategy for this year, particularly in light of COVID, I'm looking at how do we reinforce the position of ERGs as talent and business partners within our organization. And so working with the regional leaders of our employee resource groups, those ones that are in kind of PM roles, as well as our exec sponsors, to look at how are the programs that we're offering and the way in which we're delivering them, creating professional development opportunities, allowing people to flex their leadership skills in a relatively risk-free environment. Because I always, whenever I speak to our folks within our organization, I say ERGs are a great way to practice leadership, right? There's not a P&L, so the consequences of failure are minimal. And you get to work with you get to really practice what it's like to be a manager and lead teams towards a broader strategic objective. This is great as you think about how do you move into the next level of leadership. And then, so that's kind of one area that we're doing, is getting the folks to think about that, in a slightly more disciplined way around talent development. Looking at the mechanism by which we deliver. I think we've often been kind of, we've tend to think very much place-based. Okay, so if we have an ERG in Singapore, it's for the Singapore audience, and we do it all in person, and everybody has to get together, which tends to exclude some of our sales staff who are on the road a lot, and then maybe some of our surrounding locations that have smaller headcount, that don't have the same resources that we do in Singapore. So this current environment, again, has actually presented us with a great opportunity to think about how do we do this virtually? How do we think about bringing in leaders from different markets that are emerging to provide insights to other markets? How do we think about opening up the dialogue to different geos and different business units? And then I think the next piece is kind of looking at how do we then align with our customers, partners, and healthcare providers to continue to advance this conversation. Because again, everybody's hungry for knowledge. Everybody wants to know, how are you dealing with this problem? How did you manage to solve that challenge? What's working well? What's not? And so there's a huge appetite for collaboration. We're seeing that, like, as Kristina said, we're seeing some opportunities for mentorship, cross-company mentorship. But we're also seeing a huge uptick in opportunities like this, speaking engagements, collaboration, particularly investment around corporate social responsibility. So there's a unique opportunity for the ERGs to really reframe the way that they engage externally beyond kind of one-off volunteering events to really be more strategic partners to the business. And that helps to build relationships with customers, but also elevate us as an employer of choice when we are in a position to ramp up hiring.
Great. Thank you, Sophie. And Priya, you talked about representation a few moments ago, and I know diversity is a core value at Tata. Tell us a little bit about how you are defining or looking at diversity. What does it mean to be diverse talent in Tata?
So I would say we still have our largest focus is still on women, gender, right? Because if you look at any Indian workplace, and of course, at Tata's, we're not only it's not only India. We have offices and we have locations across the globe in more than 9 geographies is what we are present across the globe. Gender still remains one of the most visible dimensions of diversity that is low. So the focus across the globe is gender. Saying that, we do have a lot of focus on a PWD also. We have a lot of our stores where we actually have people with disabilities. So we have a supermarket, Trend Supermarket, which is called Big Bazaar, and it's, you know, it has its chain of supermarkets in India, and we have a lot of people with disabilities working over there. We have got, in fact, we've also received a lot of awards for that. Other than that, I think currently, these are the 2 focus areas that come out. There are other areas like the LGBTQ+, which is opening up. Because in India, there was, I mean, till very recently, we had 377, and, you know, companies were not really comfortable coming up and talking about it because there were legal implications. At the same time, you know, people were not comfortable talking about it. I think it's slowly changing. So I do see a movement over there, at least acceptance. In fact, in one of our most traditional group companies that start as Steel, we actually have insurance for same-sex partners, as well as we provide for surgeries. We pick up cost for surgeries on sex change if required. So that was something that was fairly, it was interesting for me, because to me, steel and infrastructure is probably the most conventional industry in India. So we have it there, and we actually have people from the community over there who have actually used these, policies to become more integrated into the system. So there are pockets, but yes, the focus is around gender. Through inclusion, and again, as I said earlier, at the group level, we are pushing inclusion as a more critical stickiness across the group. And through that, we are actually trying to pursue more subtle things like, earlier this year, we came up with a calendar which had 12 pillars. And of course, calendars have 12 months, so 12 pillars. And every pillar talked about an inclusion, which is something that we don't really talk about. Things like ask, don't assume, grow a little, shift a lot. These are very subtle things that make a huge difference, which has nothing to do with gender, which has nothing to do with PWD or LGBTQ+, or any kind of representation. So we are actually integrating those 12 nuanced inclusion behaviors into all the work that we do. So we do have a Being an Authentic Leader program that runs for all our line managers. It's actually based on those 12 insights, which, as I said, talk of those very small things, something like love is universal, or, break the gender stereotypes. So there are 12 of them like that. So we are doing that also to be able to move the needle on inclusion and look at different perspectives as also another aspect of diversity that we want to drive. So it's a combination and it's a journey, as I earlier said. So I think, yeah, that's where we are.
Great to hear Tara leading the way. Anu.
So just taking on on a conversation we had some time back, and we spoke about the need for sponsorship, right? For any of these agendas to actually get integrated as a way of life into your businesses and the way people behave with each other. Talk a little bit about how were you personally thinking about how this might be driven by leaders like you within organizations. So Priya, maybe I'll just sort of start off with you and move on to the rest of our panelists.
Sure, Anupama. So I, at a personal level, I think all of us are leaders. I'm very uncomfortable by saying a leader like me. I think everyone's a leader. I think we all are in it together. It's collaboration that works together. So I have always been very uncomfortable being leading from the front, yes. Being at the front, you know, I really don't like even getting onto panels like this because I feel that I still haven't done. Yeah, I'm on it. And I'm on it because of Dheeraj. So I generally don't, because I feel that it has to be more democratized. And that's the beginning of inclusion. And if we don't see it differently, we as D&I practitioners don't see it differently, the change will never happen. I don't know what to call myself, you know, D&I lead. I really don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with titles. And that's a very personal thing. And I believe that, especially I think in all work, you have to, the passion has to come from within, only then the change will happen. Otherwise, I will not be able to see the change in my team members, you know? So to me, that's my first discomfort with the question that you have. However, I will still say that I think we need to start, as D&I practitioners, we need to start talking more to people, having more conversations with people, small conversations, large conversations, take every opportunity to put forth different perspectives and different ways of thinking to everybody, and lead by example. So, you know, I mean, in my team, I always make sure that I hate presenting. I said, go ahead, do the presentation, speak in front of the, you know, leader or, you know, the business sponsor, because at the end of the day, it's a teamwork, and it's how you move the needle. It's not about one person. But I think it's important for us as D&I practitioners to, as I said, talk more, and talk about things that are uncomfortable. I had seen this lovely video, and I don't remember what it was, but it said the more uncomfortable things we talk about and get onto the table, the more inclusive we get. We tend to put things down under the carpet, and that's where all our passive aggressive little demons get into our minds, and whether it's unconscious bias, whether it is stereotypes, all of them kind of play out. So yeah, I think that would be my 2 cents on this.
Thank you so much. No, and that's a great thought to put out there about everyone being a leader and everyone taking charge of this. Kristina, as a sponsor for FMC in Australia, how do you see your role going forward in terms of helping build this within a community which is you know, still in that process of evolution?
Yeah, well, I guess first and foremost, you know, as a CEO in agriculture, there's only 2.3%. It might have gone up a little bit, but I doubt it's beyond 3% female leaders at, you know, at that level. So I have to say that I use that unashamedly to bring diversity and inclusion to the table. And you know, whether that's at an industry roundtable, whether it's again with customers and obviously internally. And I agree very much with what you said, you know, Priya, it's, you know, leading from the front, but really everybody has the leadership potential. So I guess, you know, when I kind of walk around the industry, I look for that in every occasion that I can. And, you know, once in a while, it's just a conversation with a young woman and asking a question that can make a big difference. Again, sometimes it's connecting. But, you know, I think it is really using the power that you have in the role, but then igniting the power within all the great leaders that are out there. And one thing that I've just found works really well, I've seen other great leaders do it. You know, those examples, there's a young woman in our organization who is an MVP, she's a shining star, and everybody sees that. And she's, you know, the inclusive leader that we need. And, you know, to put her on a bit of a pedestal, but talk about the examples of why that's so good, and to get other people talking about those examples, it really gets the momentum going. I think that's kind of a simple way, and just keep talking about those stars all the way up through, and what difference they'll make in the business if we can multiply.
Thank you so much. And Sophie, I'll probably pose this in a slightly different manner for
Sure.
you. You know, you've been in the region, you've seen this as an agenda across multiple geographies within Asia-Pac. And you've also been parts of very different and diverse industries, right? Technology, and you're now with J&J, which is a major player within the healthcare sector. So tell us a little bit about how have you seen this evolving, and where have sponsors really helped push the agenda across the line in the last decade in our part of the world?
Yeah, I think the way that I've seen sponsorship and allyship and role modeling change is that it used to be a very small segment of C-suite leaders who you would see visible at conferences and panels, and they would say the right things. And, you know, you kind of walk away inspired, but you then hear about these kind of broader disconnects within the organization. And I think over the last 10 years, there's been a real focus on middle management and how do you actually bring this into the middle management population, because that's where the change will really happen. It needs to be led from the top, but then you also need to make it practical, right? So what does this mean from a really tactical day-to-day perspective? And so at this point, I kind of take it as a given that senior leaders are on board with diversity and inclusion. They get it. Companies have to do it. It is the future of the way that we work. I know there was a question around meritocracy. I think it is about enabling meritocracy. That's what inclusion is that we know that there are inherent biases in the education of minority talent, in the opportunities for minority talent when it comes to initial job placement, and then their success in the workplace. So when we have a diverse and inclusive environment, we're actually able to fully enable meritocracy to succeed. It's not about putting unqualified people into leadership. It's about unleashing the power of your talent so that you can better serve your customers and your end users, right? Especially in an emerging economy. And so then the question is that at a senior level, this is something that should be a given. And if you're not there yet, you know, just wait. It's coming. And then it's like, how do you actually do this from a really tactical perspective day to day? So let me give you some examples of how I've been doing it lately. One of the things that I do when I talk to leaders, because I know that folks are under undue stress and pressure these days, right? And so I talk to our leaders. I say, so how are you coping? How do you take breaks in your time? How do you balance a little bit, find some balance in your schedule? And, you know, they'll share with me kind of some tips and techniques, and I'll make sure, and I encourage them, okay, make sure that you at your next leadership team meeting, when you're driving business performance, talk about what you did, talk about spending time with your kids, talk about the fact that you turned off your mobile phone, so that you're signaling to people that this is important. Some really basic things, because again, I saw that there was a question around what are some best practices. One of the things that we have in J&J is everybody can see each other's calendar. So you can see what people's appointments are. So I always make sure I block off time for a break. I put in break or email or rest. And so people can see exactly what I'm doing. I'm very transparent about it. And again, I try to encourage people that it's okay. You don't have to be on all the time. And this is about inclusive leadership. And then one other thing, there was another comment I saw around difficult leaders. And again, this question around practical role modeling around sponsorship. The piece around LGBT inclusion is, you know, challenging, I think, particularly in this part of the world. And so one of the things that I found in kind of one of my more, I think, successful, I would say, now I look back on it now, successful engagements with a leader who became really a D&I champion as a result of the conversation. It was somebody who was very much resistant to LGBT inclusion, was very deeply personally uncomfortable with it. And so one of the things that I did with him is that we ended up having, once he was comfortable in sharing that with me, we ended up having a conversation. I asked him, okay, well, tell me more. Tell me about what's important to you. Tell me about your values. Tell me about what makes this particularly uncomfortable for you. What's important for you from an inclusion standpoint? Do you want to see your teams be successful? Do you want to have an environment where people feel included, that they can bring themselves? And all of those things were yes, 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 yes. And so we were able to kind of find a middle ground where he wasn't going to change his point of view, and he wasn't going to change his opinion. But what he did want to do was make sure that he had an environment where people didn't feel like they needed to compromise themselves, that people felt safe, that they felt included, and they felt supported, and that they could be successful. And so that's where he was able to lean into that conversation. And it was through that dialogue that we had that he kind of understood and had a modeling of how you can have an inclusive conversation with someone who you might not necessarily see eye to eye to, or you might not necessarily always understand. And so he was able to take that and then have broader conversations within his organization. And I think as a result, he became a better leader, and he became a true role model around inclusion, despite the fact that maybe not everything he was on board with, but he could show how you could have nuance and complexity as a leader, and still create an environment where people could feel safe and show up and be themselves. So, yeah.
Thank you. So you've been able to facilitate and be an ally to the change that some people might need support on within an organization. So thank you for sharing that. Dee, over to you.
Thank you. And looking at some of the questions coming in from you all out there, there's one really which is on the minds of most of us at the moment, and how the pandemic might derail some of our efforts around D&I, given that a lot of us are facing some harsh economic realities at the moment. How do we make sure D&I continues to play a prominent role on the agenda? So my question to the panel really is, what advice would you have for our listeners who are keen to renew their commitments? Kristina, if I could start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think Sophie actually said it really well before with the ERGs. I think they are great grassroots initiatives. They're leadership opportunities, and by and large, they're free. You know, I'm sure leaders will put the bill for some pizza or whatever it might be. Uber Eats nowadays, I guess, to support something like that. That's certainly what we find, what I found across the career, but certainly in FMC, is those people that are really passionate and have drive, they'll always find a way to do more with less. That's in the business, but absolutely in D&I as well. You know, for example, during the drought period here in Australia, we had significant budget cuts, you know, well before COVID. And you know, we just anchored into a couple of sessions for the team, and our HR director then built peer mentoring circles. You know, that's nothing really new, but it's something that was innovative, helped to carry the theme forward, and everybody liked it, and they learned even more from it probably than from being facilitated all the way through. I think the other thing, you know, that is free is things that we've touched on before, is that leadership consistency and behavior through the tough times. So you keep setting that example in small ways, like in your calendar, in bigger ways, you know, by making statements and continuing to follow commitments. But, you know, then also I think thinking beyond what might take some funding if you can't hire people short term, to what is your sphere of influence, and really targeting on that. A lot of that is people, conversations, and behavior. It doesn't take much funding.
Thank you, Kristina. And Priya, how concerned are you that D&I might fall off the agenda at Tata?
Not really. So I do believe that things go up and down, right? And one thing as a D&I practitioner you have to have a lot of is patience and resilience. The fact that, you know, driving a D&I agenda is driving change. Change has its own curves, and we've seen that. We know it. There are innumerable, you know, models of change, right? And there are ups and there are downs. And that happens for business also. There are times business is great, there are times business is not. You don't shut down an organization. You go through it, right? So it's about believing in it and going through it. Also another book, I mean, one of the books that I really work by and I really like is written by Goldratt, which is on theory of constraints. It's about how can you work through with what you have. It's never that you'll have everything in life, whether it's your personal life, whether it's your professional life, whether it's driving an agenda or driving a business. It's about looking, and Sophie talked about it and Christina talked about it. You know, when you look from a different lens, there is so much you can do without a budget. Yes, budgets are fantastic. If I had a lot of money, I could do a lot of things, but there is so much that you can drive without a budget. There are ERGs, and this is exactly what we're doing at the Tatas. Like Sophie said, we have our ERGs under We at Tata. So we are, actually it worked perfectly, because earlier we used to kind of think, where is the, meet going to happen? Is it Mumbai? Is it Delhi? Is it Jamshedpur? Now that's solved. It's online. So everyone's sitting, and I can have the globe. I can have the 3 lakh women on Tatas to join. It's open to everybody, right? What we're doing is we're actually integrating wellness into all our conversations, which is also something which is very doable. We already have tie-ups with EAPs and wellness organizations who are only too happy to help. So we're leveraging that. We're leveraging conversations, a lot of mentoring, coffee conversations, of course, everything online, but leveraging a lot of leaders. And it's actually been great because you're pushing the lead. See, change happens when your own people talk. If I get people from outside to come and talk, yeah, it's nice, you get inspired, but as Sophie said, you go out and then, you go to that panel where everyone talks really inspiring things, but by the time you hit your desk the next day, it's all gone out of the window. But when your own people talk, and here, because we don't have budgets, I'm pushed to have our own leaders being put into the spotlight, talking about being authentic and taking time off to, rest or be with your children or maybe cook a meal, because, we in India are spoiled by staff at home and we don't have anyone at home currently. So even cooking a meal can become, and we have elaborate foods for large families. So I think it's given us opportunity to leverage a lot of things through which we can drive. Yes, we are seeing a little bit of a pushback in capability building programs, which we are partnering with various partners, which we are, online series of building women, building careers of women, or, things, larger programs are seeing a slight amount of pushback with the budgets. But there is a whole lot more that has come up, which is being driven. Actually, my fear is that once we are on the other side of the tunnel, will we still sustain the good that we learned during this, or will we just go back to where we were? And that's what worries me. And I think that's what worries us at Tata's, the group driving inclusion.
Thank you, Priya. Let's hope so. Let's hope we won't go backwards. And Sophie, Johnson&Johnson, clearly diversity and inclusion has been a priority at J&J for a long time. For our audience today who are perhaps getting some of the pushback or facing some of the constraints Priya's just described, what advice would you have for them to stay the course?
Well, one thing, so a couple years ago, I founded an informal network of multinational D&I leaders who are in the region to kind of get together and form, trade best practices, share challenges in a relatively confidential environment. And so when COVID first hit and it was clear that this was going to really have a pretty significant impact on our businesses, I sent around a survey and I asked people, how concerned are you that D&I is going to fall off the agenda? And just shy of 30 people felt that it was going to fall off the agenda. Close to 70% felt it would stay the same and stay on, if not more important. And I think I've seen that reinforced in conversations. I've just over the last few weeks, the number of outreach from companies who don't have official formal D&I roles, but have D&I champions who've wanted to kind of figure out, how do I do this, has really gone up quite significantly. And I think it is the reality that we are confronted with, that there is no normal. No one has a roadmap for this. And we need more from our business. We need more from our leaders. We need more from our people. And the traditional ways of working just don't work. We need to try new things. And so there's this huge appetite for innovation and piloting and trying to solve the challenges that we're facing now. So what I would say is, if you find yourself in that position, or you currently are in a D&I role, now is a great time to really reevaluate your D&I approach and strategy and get rigorous. Really look at, what are the challenges that your business is facing, and how does D&I complement that? I always say, when I think about my job is to drive better business performance. And I offer those consulting services to our business leaders through the tools of diversity and inclusion. My job is not to create extra work or to do things that don't add to the bottom line. We work for for-profit companies. And so just keep that in mind and really think about, what are the big things that you have going on within your organization or your industry, and how do you take your D&I strategy and pivot it to be reflective of that. It's going to make you a better consultant, it's going to make you a better partner to the business, and it's going to make you be more efficient in what you do. And I think to Priya's point, you don't always need a lot of money to do that. If you are a valuable asset to the business, you will find a way. And so that's the thing that I'll give you an example of how I do that. So I've been working a lot with our supply chain teams. And so with the trade war that's been happening, obviously, between China and the US before COVID, there's already been a huge focus in supply chain around, how do we build better resiliency? How do we diversify our supply chain to mitigate risk? And then with COVID happening, obviously, when we have our consumer base, they had to respond very quickly to changes in demand. And as a result, there was just huge immense pressure to not only retool our manufacturing line, but to also just ramp up production in certain products. And so when I talk about D&I, I go into the supply chain, I acknowledge the pressures that they're under as a business. I show that I've done my research, so I don't need to be a supply chain expert, but I have a general understanding of some of the challenges that they're facing. And I talk about D&I in a way to help them build resiliency. So I know they're already diversifying their manufacturing process, but D&I can help them to drive greater productivity and resiliency within their teams. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it through the prism of leadership. We're going to talk about it through the prism of innovation, because we know diversity drives innovation. And we're going to talk about inclusion as a way to harness that sense of belonging to drive better business outcomes. And so when we talk about it that way, I get a lot of people afterwards to say, oh, I thought that diversity and inclusion was about those gender metrics. I'm like, well, yes, that's part of it, but ultimately we're here to help you be more successful, and metrics is one way in which we drive that accountability, but it's about this bigger picture. And I found that the response rate to that messaging, particularly current, has just been incredibly positive. And so there's a much stronger buy-in actually now, I think, in D&I, when you can show your relevancy, particularly in a time of crisis, and the appetite is there.
Great example. Thank you so much, Sophie. Anu, over to you for the Q&A. I know we've answered some of the questions as we've gone through. What would you like to pose to our speakers today from the Q&A?
Yeah, so I perhaps just take us away from the Q&A, and there's a lot over here that you've already said. If there are any specific examples, and I know Sophie sort of gave us an example of how she's helped move the needle for one of her business leaders. Priya, Kristina, have you had to sort of work with certain personalities during this time where there was a lot of resistance to change and you needed to sort of help bring them across the line? Love to hear a little bit about how you've managed that successfully and what can our audience learn from that.
So I'll share an example, and we're in middle of the example, right? Again, the example isn't completed. Yeah. Secondly, it wasn't about resistance. I think it was about getting them to see something that is relevant. Yeah. So we have a. I don't know if you are aware that we have a second career program, which was we pioneered it in India way before you know D&I was being spoken of. So this was 2008. So where we kind of gave internships to women with breaks, and we also did mainstream them after, depending on both sides, whether it worked or not worked. But currently we are we're looking at a broader base because I think from 2008 to 2020, things have changed significantly. And there's this whole concept of gig economy and why only women, even men take breaks. So there's a lot of conversation that's going on, right? And we did a little bit of our homework, and we did have a little bit of a small prototype ready for alternate staffing methods, which is something broader than just a second career program. We are actually leveraging alternate staffing models for optimizing, or workforce management ways. We are working with companies who are wanting to look at a different way of staffing than just having FTEs. So we probably waited for a very long time because people were not ready to talk about it. Businesses pushed us, and now we've just picked it up from our kitty and said, hey, hi, we have something here. Would that interest you? Have we moved the needle completely? Have we convinced them? Have we started? No, it's a process, right? But conversations, yes. Even the fact that people are agreeing for the conversations is a positive start for me. It would take probably a quarter or maybe 6 months. Things take time to be able to kind of move from a thought and a prototype to a program. But yes, if that is a kind of a example, yes, we have. That's what something we did. But wait for the right time and then just brought out something that we.
Thank you. And maybe I'll just also put in one more question here to all of you. We've spoken a lot about diversity over the years, right? And if we start looking at our workforce, it looks pretty diverse in terms of the way it looks and feels and sees. I think, and you had sort of made a point when we last spoke, Priya, about the inclusivity being the white elephant in the room, right? How inclusive as an organization have we managed to become as a workforce over this last decade? How are you seeing sort of the needle moving from just sort of ticking the boxes on a diversity sheet to actually creating a workforce that's inclusive and well aligned?
Me? Yeah.
I'll leave it to all of you, whoever. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I since I unmuted myself, I'll just go first on that. So yeah, I do believe, at least in India, and I'll speak for India here, is so we are an inherently diverse country, right? If there are two men or two women sitting together, and we spoke about this, Anupama, we can keep peeling the onions of diversity till the cows come home, right? And we still will not have completed that. We are so diverse in our ways, in our thoughts, in our languages, religions, everything, practices, ways of living. But I think inclusion is something that does not come easy to us. And that's something that is very social and cultural, and something that is deeply embedded into us through our caste system. Good or bad is something that is not something that we are getting into over here, but it's something that allows us to be very parochial, stay within our group of people, and not and somewhere be not very accepting of people who are different than us. And I think that's so deeply ingrained in us, that inclusion becomes something that we do not bring automatically to the workplaces. So I think for India specifically, diversity is not an issue. We are an inherently, like, of course, if you say I want to increase my gender diversity, yes, we do have a problem on hand there. We want to do, but are we a diverse organization? I think yes, we are. All the men we have are not. I mean, if I have 70% men in an organization, they are very, very diverse, right? No two men would be different, same. So that's not an issue. But inclusion is huge. It's a huge white or pink or blue elephant in the room that, and we are not ready to talk about it. We are still at that denial level. Also maybe because it's so deeply ingrained in me. I mean, I'm a D&I practitioner. I hold my own biases. I hold some of it, which has probably come from years and years of, conditioning. So breaking that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. To your question, and that's my last thing I'd like to say, is about the tick in the box to actually moving to a space where it has integrated into business. We're somewhere, I think, the first median or something like that. I really don't see that getting into that sustainable mode yet in India. We're still struggling with between tick in the box to doing it out of positive, affirmative action. So I think we are there. Saying that, there are companies who do some great work. We at Tata's do some great work. There are Unilever in India does some great work. Godrej. So there are lots of companies that do. I'm not saying that they don't, but yes, I do believe that we are still somewhere as a little toddler, if I might say, in India. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Priya. Kristina, Sophie, love your views as well. You've seen Australia, you've seen the rest of Asia.
I mean, maybe one thing, an example I'd like to share. Within FMC, we have an Asia Pacific Inclusion Council. So we actually have representatives from all countries where we operate across Asia Pacific, and we have streams across gender equity, intergenerational, multicultural, disabilities, and LGBTQ. And that setup, which is the excellent leadership of our regional VP and a couple other leaders, has, to your point, Priya, I've learned so much about the challenges in India, not only on gender equity, which is the stream that I lead, but across all the spheres. And when the people that are part of that group are, those passionate people that have put their hands up, that already have about 200% workload, but are the ones that always find more time. We've built country plans, and then we talk about the region, and we found there are a lot of commonalities across the different cultures, but then there's things that are very different. And while, in New Zealand, someone can just get up and go create an initiative, in India and Pakistan, it's very much me speaking with the leaders and then supporting that team at the other level. And I think that setup in itself just draws so much learning for those that want to do really well. But for us too, I think, the honest answer is our ambition is good. D&I is in our DNA, but we have a long, long way to go. Whether that's in Australia, New Zealand, in broader agriculture, go back to my home country in the US, the diversity is not great, but intergenerational diversity is a space that I think will make a huge difference now in agriculture, with the younger generation coming in, driving innovation in technology, and the learning agility that comes with it. So it's probably riding the waves of some of those spaces that will drive a lot of business impact, and then just keeping that melting pot of learning and diversity and inclusion.
Thank you.
And Anu, I might just jump in and kind of go back to the initial question around, one is how are we moving the needle on inclusion, and then a little bit around what are we doing when we face resistance in the current environment. It kind of got me thinking about what are, over the course of my career, I mean, I've been in rooms where, I've been hired as a consultant to come in and, work with companies on D&I, and it was clear that HR was keen to have the conversation, but the business not so much. And so I've definitely seen the full spectrum of responses when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And I think with experience, I've learned not to get too rattled by it. it's usually pretty consistent. There's usually, I actually was trying to think of what would be the profiles. There's like 5 profiles I can like find to the resistant leader. One is, as I mentioned, somebody who might have beliefs, like religious or cultural beliefs that may run counter to certain elements of D&I. People who don't understand the business case, so fundamentally don't understand like what value does this bring. That's usually pretty easy actually to deal with. Leaders who aren't sure what to do, so that leads to inaction, right? You've got people who feel that it's reverse discrimination. So feel like, well, now you're calling into question, like you're limiting opportunities for people who are like me. And then the other one, which I think is really interesting, and this one is people who really think they're doing the right thing, and present, but really don't see D&I as really that important fundamentally to the business. So they say the right things, but it's really seen as, D&I is really seen as soft and fluffy, and it's all about leading simply with heart and no head. And they're very resistant to the head narrative, very resistant. And you can actually get real pushback when you start to talk about business case. They do not want to hear that. And so that's that's an interesting one, because people are saying the right things, but the approach is, in the long run, not doing the initiative a favor, because it actually undermines the work when you don't validate the importance of D&I to the business. So there's usually, if you can, I think, if you're somebody who's looking to champion D&I within your organization, I'd kind of figure out what are the personas that you're dealing with, and then try to frame your strategy and response. And it's not about a battle. It's about how do you meet the concerns and the needs of leaders. I often think that, especially in areas of crisis, leaders are really concerned about how they're perceived and what they're driving in the business, how they're driving priorities. And so it's it's supporting them, it's giving them confidence, it's giving them more tools, it's helping them to be more successful leaders. So it's not about convincing them, it's not about proving them wrong or right, it's not about, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go in and push back against this, really combative leader. It's really about, how do I have a conversation and engage the humanity of this person so that we can find some common ground, right? I actually find it very, very rare that I meet any leaders or folks who are just blatantly bigoted. That's not actually been the majority of my experience when it comes to detractors. It's usually there's something that somebody's hung up on, and usually you can find a way to meet them in a mid-ground, and it may be a journey. Sometimes it might just be a conversation and boom, though they do happen, and sometimes it may take years. But as long as you position yourself as a confidential partner and a trusted partner, I think, and leaders see that, and that you're interested in what they do and their business and their concerns, I think you can find a way to move forward together. And in the end, going through that kind of labor, that process will actually lead to a stronger partnership between you and the business, and I think your outcomes will be better in the long run.
Thank you.
Sophie, thanks for sharing the personas there. I'm sure, like me, most of our audience were thinking of people they know who fit each of those personas. I know I certainly was, and I'm sad to draw our conversation to a close today. I'm sure we could all chat for hours on the topic, and it's been very enlightening for me, as I'm sure it is for our audience, to learn about your experiences, for you to share your personal experiences, your organizational perspectives, and I'm sure as well there's plenty of ideas and tools for people to shamelessly steal in amongst all of that gold you shared with us today. A couple of things that really stuck in my mind were, driving D&I as driving change, and pivot that change, pivot D&I to the business, the problems, the concerns. How do we help the business solve for those? And I think that's something that will stay in my mind from today's conversation. And it's been humbling to have so many people join us, and to feel that we have so many D&I champions and advocates out there. We've certainly come so far on the D&I journey, and still have quite a way to travel. So thank you again on behalf of Russell Reynolds, Anu, and myself. Can I express my gratitude to Priya, Kristina, and Sophie for joining us today, and to all of you for taking the time to spend it with us during this conversation today. Thank you again, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you.